I go down a lot of rabbit holes, but I end up in the central banking rabbit hole. And thanks to authors like G. Edward Griffin and The Creature from Jekyll Island, I came to see central banking as like the main problem in the world. That we have an institutionalized system of time theft or property violation in the heart of every modern economy, right? Including the American economy, where we say we're free market capitalists, yet 1/2 of every transaction is fiat currency, which is anti-capitalistic money. So we're nowhere near free market capitalists. We're not even halfway. And this is not an opinion.
Right.
This is Marx's 1848 Manifesto of the Communist Party, measure number 5, the central bank. So it's crazy. It's crazy that we think we won against communism.
Right.
Our money is communism. And it's a real problem. Yeah. So I think for the same reasons we saw the Soviet Union collapse and not work in the 20th century, we're going to see Soviet money, if you will, collapse in the 21st.
Did you, and you kind of stumbled into the Austrian School of Economics.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that.
That was the piece.
And what's the value that you find from a broad Austrian perspective?
That was the piece I was missing in my thinking to understand Bitcoin earlier, I think. Because I had encountered Bitcoin around 2014, but I didn't understand that it was the answer to central banking. When I got deeper into the space in 2016, 2017, I started going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and that touches a lot of Austrian economics. Actually reading Safeteen's book in 2018, right when it was released. I think it was like April of 18. That was my big light bulb. Like it's been talked about for a long time, right? The sly roundabout way, as Hayek said. Bitcoin is effectively that.
So, I mean, you like things like competing currencies, but you're convinced Bitcoin will win the competition, right?
Yeah, compete away. I just think that the value of money is the size and depth of its network. So that's why it tends towards one. Right. There's more, it's a power law. There's more value in deeper liquidity. That's why we had one gold ultimately. And why I think we have one digital gold.
Is Bitcoin useful, or in a broader sense? And I guess if we're talking about Austrian stuff, people like Mises and in his own way Hayek talked about the subjective theory of value. Is it that Bitcoin, and for lack of a better term, a kind of capitalist society or a laissez-faire society, it's good because it allows people to kind of operationalize their subjective value?
Well, I guess that's one way to look at it. I think it would be more, here's a way to think about it. So there's a concept in economics called the inequality of exchange. So that means you and I come to the table to negotiate a trade. You perceive that whatever I have is of more value to you than what you're giving up. And I perceive the same thing in reverse. What you have is more valuable to me than what I'm giving up.
That's why we're making a deal.
Right. Yeah. And once we negotiate and reach a point of mutually voluntary exchange, we both leave that trade with more psychological profit or value. Right. We both believe we're better off. Whether or not we actually are on some other measure is a different thing. Yeah. But there's a net value creation, right? Through only through voluntary exchange. If you take out the element of volition, that means I'm basically taking from you, right? Otherwise, you didn't want to do the deal. So you're leaving the deal worse off. That's value destructive. Right. Bitcoin gets rid of that coercive element, right? You can't take my Bitcoin. It basically forces transactions. And this is not perfect, but shifts the incentives of the world towards less coercion and more cooperation. So more creation of value.
Yeah. You kind of famously published an open letter to Ray Dalio, the super investor. Describe what was in that letter. And then, one thing that's interesting is that Ray Dalio, you were addressing that to, and the one who exists now, has changed his point of view a bit. Yeah. So talk about that.
As we knew he would. Right. I was operating a hedge fund, Ray's the most successful hedge fund manager, I think, ever. So I was reading his book, Principles, with my business partner. And it's a good book. He's got a lot. It's a very dense book. There's a lot of life and work principles as he divides them up. And I'm reading this book, also going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, also hearing Ray's basically coming out publicly against Bitcoin, right? For all the wrong reasons, all the counterpoints that had been thoroughly debunked. So you could tell he had not done his homework. I'm reading his book, Principles, and it's like there's so many of these principles that are Bitcoin. They're embodied in Bitcoin effectively. So I'm like, I ended up just writing this thing out of frustration. I'm like, this guy is not like, Ray, you've not done your homework. You've literally written all these principles that are embodied in this technology that you're decrying. So yeah, it's a long letter. I think it's a 100-minute read, 90 pages or something. But I went principle by principle. I actually initially debunked his arguments. He has 3 counterpoints to Bitcoin. I debunked those. And then I go through the principles he laid out in his book and described how Bitcoin embodies those principles.
Could you summarize that?
To summarize,
what did he mostly get wrong about Bitcoin?
He got everything wrong about Bitcoin. So his main counter arguments, if I can recall them, were governments will never allow it, which is where so many people are stuck in the Bitcoin rabbit hole, right? Like you start to study it, you're like, okay, it is valuable, but then you hit this stumbling block of, well, government will never allow it. And then you just stop thinking at that point.
Right. And I mean, your counter would be that it doesn't really matter if governments allow it or not, because it's going to route around it. Yeah.
The great question is how. The $850 billion question, which is Bitcoin's market cap today, how do you stop it? So I understand they want to stop it. It's the greatest enemy of the state in human history. The question is how. So that was one point. He also thought he had the Facebook, MySpace fallacy in his mind. So I had to do a discussion of network effects and protocols and how it's different than an application like Facebook versus MySpace. And I can't recall the other one.
So where is he now on Bitcoin?
As far as I know, and I haven't looked at it closely, is that he's allocating a small percentage of his portfolio into Bitcoin. He's always been a big gold proponent. That was another aspect. It's like, Ray, you get gold, right? You get the history of money. You know, where I think he stopped, though, is he would describe gold as having intrinsic value, and that's an economic fallacy in and of itself, but it's also not enough.
Right.
You need to know the properties gold was selected for in the free market. And that's why I was beating that drum for a long time. Money needs to be divisible, durable, recognizable, portable, scarce. Gold was the best technology we ever had satisfying those properties. Bitcoin essentially perfects those properties. So if you get your thinking to that layer of like why gold was chosen, then you come to understand Bitcoin. So I try to go through that in the letter as well.